Hello, and welcome to the International Society for Anthrozoology 2020 Conference Welcome Public Lecture. My name is Carrie Westgarth, and I am a Senior Lecturer in Human-Animal Interaction at the University of Liverpool, and we're the hosts for this year's conference. The International Society for Anthrozoology, or ISAZ as it's known, is a non-profit scholarly organisation for the scientific study of human-animal interactions. It produces a journal, Anthrozoos, and also runs a yearly conference. Of course, this year our plans had to change somewhat, and we've gone virtual. Thanks to generous sponsorship by Pets at Home, we've been able to make our welcome opening event free and open to the general public. We're very grateful for this opportunity for Professor Clive Wynne from Arizona State University to present to you his scientific studies of dogs and their interactions with people. Now over to some words from our sponsors.
Hi, I'm Amy Widburn from the team at Pets at Home. I'm conscious that this is an international conference, so some of you may not have heard of us before. We are the UK's leading pet care business, and our purpose is to create a better life together, happy and healthy pets and their owners. We help people to be the best owners that they can be by providing everything they need to be able to look after their pet, from food, toys and bedding, right through to grooming services, our first opinion veterinary care and world-class specialist veterinary hospitals. We're delighted that it's actually been possible to go ahead with this conference in an online format and to be able to sponsor the opening address from Clive Wynne. These strange times created by the coronavirus pandemic have shown us that it's our relationship with our pets that has become more important than ever. Their companionship, their creation of a sense of routine and purpose have been invaluable. At Pets at Home, we believe that our lives are better with pets, and we're sure that you're as interested as we are to hear Clive's academic research into how our cherished dogs are unique because they love us. From the team at Pets at Home, we wish you the very best and hope you enjoy this address and the next few days of the conference.
Hello everyone, sorry about that, seemed like the volume had gone a little bit for it, so we'll try and play that again later and get it back up for everyone. But first of all, we would like to introduce Professor Clive Wynne. He's the founding director of the Canine Science Collaboratory at Arizona State University. Previously, he founded the Canine Cognition and Behavior Laboratory at University of Florida, the first lab of its kind in the United States. A native of the United Kingdom, Wynne has lived and worked in Germany and Austria, as well as the United States, and gives frequent talks to audiences around the world. The author of several previous academic books and of more than 100 peer-reviewed scientific journals, articles that count among the most highly cited studies on dog psychology. He has also published pieces in Psychology Today, New Scientist, and the New York Times, and has appeared in several television documentaries about dogs in science on National Geographic Explorer, PBS, and the BBC. His latest book, Dog is Love, Why and How Your Dog Loves You, was published by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt in September. He lives in Tempe, Arizona. So thank you, and over to Clive.
Hi there, I'm Clive Wynne, the director of the Canine Science Collaboratory at Arizona State University, where I'm also a professor in the psychology department. And thank you to the ISAZ organizing committee for inviting me to the annual meeting. I so wish I could be physically present. You know, I'm sure we all are getting heartily sick of doing everything through the internet, but hey, you know, life sends you lemons, so you make lemonade. So I hope this is at least an appetizing lemonade for you. So I want to talk to you today about this fundamental question that I think grabs everybody who thinks about dogs for more than just a moment. And that question is, what is it that makes dogs special? I mean, clearly dogs are remarkable beings. They're remarkably successful from a biological point of view. There are 800 million or more dogs on the surface of this planet, where there are only a few 100,000 wolves left on planet Earth. All of our dogs are descended from wolves, and they're vastly more successful in the modern world than the species from which they're descended. And so what could it be? What could be the secret of these amazing animals' success? That's what I want to talk to you about. And as you can see on this first slide, I'm already revealing what I think the answer is, because I recently published last year a book, Dog is Love, Why and How Your Dog Loves You. Or if you're in the UK, it's The Science of Why and How Your Dog Loves You. So I published this book, and that is what my research has, the conclusion that my research has forced me to, that I think it's this capacity to form strong emotional bonds that is the secret of dog success. Now, to many people who own dogs, who live with dogs, this will not come across as a terrible surprise. But to the scientific community, I think this is somewhat surprising. Dogs have been subjects in psychology since the very, very beginning of psychology. As I like to say to my students, does the name Pavlov ring a bell? So dogs have been there from the very beginnings, from the 19th century, but they were then largely forgotten in the second half of the 20th century until two scientists quite independently became interested in dog behavior and became interested in what has made dogs so successful in human society. And those two scientists are Brian Hare, who's now a professor at Duke University in North Carolina, and Adam McCloskey from Budapest, Hungary, where he's at a university I cannot pronounce the name of. And they both triggered a new wave of interest in dogs, specifically around this question of what special skills do dogs have. And as far as I know, quite independently of each other, they came to the conclusion that there's something about the intelligence, the cognition of dogs that is responsible for their success in human society. Specifically, that they have a certain kind of smarts. And undoubtedly, dogs can be very smart. They can show great intelligence. And Brian Hare and Adam McCloskey argued that dogs have developed during the perhaps 20,000 year process of domestication, that dogs have developed special forms of cognition that give them a special understanding of what people are doing. Now, a great many experiments have been carried out to test this hypothesis. I'm just going to focus very, very quickly on just one of them, which has become the most widely practiced test and is actually very, very simple to carry out. So here you see a picture of my one-time graduate student, Monique Udell, now a professor at Oregon State University. And you could see her legs and you can see one of her hands, and she's pointing at a container on the ground. And this is a frame grab from a video of Monique carrying out an experiment, replicating work that Brian Hare and Adam McCloskey and their collaborators and many other people have done, where you simply point at something and you see whether your dog will go where you point. And if you haven't already done this, you can try this with your own dog at home. And most of you will find that most of the time, your dog will go where you point. The question is this something unique about dogs? Is this something special about dogs? Is this dog showing us that they have special skills, a special form of cognition, human-like social cognition, Brian Hare called it? Is it unique to dogs? Is it something special? Both Brian Hare and Adam McCloskey had the opportunity to test hand-reared wolves, the animal from which all dogs are descended. And they concluded from those tests that wolves were incapable of doing this, and that therefore it did indeed represent something unique about dogs, something that had come to dogs during the process of domestication. Monique Udell and I had tested dogs for a couple of years when we were contacted by an outfit in Indiana called Wolf Park. Wolf Park has been hand-rearing wolves since 1974. So they are very, very good and skilled at hand-rearing wolves. They had heard of the new research claiming that dogs had skills in understanding people that wolves did not share, and they were skeptical of these claims. These people work with wolves during the day, and most of them go home to dogs in the evening. So they have a very nuanced and intimate sense of what wolves and dogs can do and cannot do and how they compare. They thought it unlikely that wolves would fail. They thought it unlikely that wolves would fail on this task. So they invited us up to Indiana, where we started carrying out this simple test on wolves. Here you see a photograph of the same setup, a different student, Lindsay Meerkam, now professor at Monmouth University. And you can see she's pointing to a container on the ground for this wolf that's just in the foreground of the image. And to our very considerable surprise, we found that wolves were every bit as good at this task. This particular population of hand-reared wolves were every bit as good at this task as were the most successful among pet dogs. We also found that dogs that do not live as pets in human homes, but that find themselves in animal shelters, were much less successful than pet dogs. I think it also goes without saying that there would, of course, be vast numbers of wolves that would fail at this task. And other species have been tested as well now. And the pattern that comes through from the testing of many different species and individuals from different populations within species is that your ability on this task, your ability to understand the implications of human gestures, does not depend on what species you belong to. Rather, it depends on your individual conditions of life. If you grow up, as the vast majority of pet dogs do, you grow up in a human household, utterly and completely dependent on human beings to fulfill every one of your life needs, from what you eat and when you eat, to your opportunities to go out and explore and have exercise, even whether you can urinate and defecate without risk of chastisement. Every aspect of your life depends on human intervention. Then you will be very sensitive to what people are up to. And you will be very sensitive to human movements, anything a person does that tells you when something good is going to happen in your life. All animals of any species that's been tested, if they have been reared alongside human beings from early in life and remain dependent on humans throughout their lives, they show this kind of sensitivity. On the other hand, even if you come from a domesticated species, even if you are a dog, but you were not raised in close contact with human beings, your life ongoing does not closely depend on the actions of people, then you do not show this kind of sensitivity. So, cutting here a very long story, very, very short. And, you know, I could talk about, and in the book I do talk about, dogs that understand hundreds of words. Of course, dogs like that are unbelievably rare. But I have myself interacted with Chaser, the dog who holds the present record, knew the names of over 1,200 objects. I also am always very impressed by sniffer dogs, dogs that can detect things in the world that we ourselves cannot detect. You know, there are smart dogs out there, I don't deny that. But having done a study of this, I do not think that the success of dogs in human society is directly linked to anything to do with their intelligence. I do not believe that. I do not believe that dogs have evolved a special form of cognition that gives them insight into what's going on in our minds that no other species can share. I just don't see the evidence for that. Okay, so that's the first so many years that I was studying dogs. And it's exciting and fascinating to show that something is not the case. As a scientist, that's a very satisfying thing to, as it were, prick a balloon and show, convince, at least to my own satisfaction, that something is not the case. But it does then lead to the open question. If that's not what makes dogs special, what does make dogs special? And when this first set of results came out, it appeared to people who didn't know me as if I might be saying that I don't believe there's anything special about dogs. And it was around this time that a journalist, Benoit Denizet-Lewis, was traveling around the United States with his dog, interviewing people who are experts in dogs, people who study dogs. And at the time I was at the University of Florida, and he came out to Florida and he chatted with me, and I thought we had a nice chat. And afterwards he wrote me up in his book, and this is what he said about me. He said, Florida's Canine Cognition and Behavior Lab was led at the time of my visit by psychologist Clive Wynne, a former pigeon researcher, considered by some to be the Debbie Downer of the canine cognition field. Well, you know, you don't get into what I do to win any popularity contests, and, you know, it doesn't offend me if somebody wants to call me a Debbie Downer, that's okay. But still, it sort of brought home to me the position that I'd ended up in, that I had become somebody who was viewed as holding the view that there's nothing special about dogs. That dogs are just ordinary animals, nothing remarkable, nothing to see here. And I knew that wasn't what I believed, but having this journalist spell things out like this forced me to think about, well, okay, I don't believe dogs have special intelligence, special forms of cognition. What do I think makes dogs special? And I really wasn't sure. And it was around this time that my family, finally adopted a dog. For a long time, I'd had dogs when I was a kid, but for a long time, and at other phases of my life. But there was an extended period when I was first studying dogs, when I didn't actually have a dog of my own at home. Bunch of personal reasons. And finally, we felt that we were ready to take on a dog, and so we got this dog, a 1-year-old mutt from the local shelter, and we called her Zephos. And it was immediately apparent that we had not struck on one of the world's smartest dogs. I mean, she really was not that quick, but it was also very, very quickly apparent that she had a superpower. And because this was at home and not at work, and with my family and not with my colleagues and students, that superpower, naturally, we called it love. We said, she loves us. We love her, she loves us. And actually, she loves almost everybody. She very, very rapidly makes these strong, powerful connections with people. And I thought, well, this is interesting. This is interesting. On the one hand, it was sort of obvious. You know, I'd had dogs before, I'd lived with dogs before. I knew how, excuse me, I knew how affectionate dogs can be. And yet still I was taken by surprise by this renewed experience of being the object of a dog's love and affection. And I thought, well, how could we study this? How can we make love, this sort of squishy, amorphous thing, how can we make that a subject of scientific study? And Monique Udell and I and others in the group, we talked about this. And we thought we need to find a way to study this bond of affection. Is it possible that this could be dogs' superpower? That they have this ability to form strong bonds so easily with members of other species, and that this is the secret of their success. It was around this time that I went to the Bahamas, and among other things, I visited with William Fielding, a professor at the College of the Bahamas. He's a social scientist, and he's done interesting studies asking the local people and also visiting tourists about the dogs that live in the Bahamas. Now, the Bahamas is not the third world, but like a lot of poorer parts of the world, you find a lot of dogs living on the streets. They have lots of street dogs in the Bahamas, and it's a pretty good place to be a street dog. The local human population have a very positive attitude towards the dogs on their streets, and the climate is relatively gentle. Subsequently, I've seen street dogs on the streets of Moscow, where it gets bitterly cold in the winter, and obviously that's very bad for the dogs. But the Bahamas, apart from hurricanes and things, it's a pretty gentle climate. So it's a pretty good place to be a street dog. And yet, William Fielding was telling me that even in the Bahamas, most puppies do not reach their first birthday. So the puppies are born on the street. Their mother nurses them for about 8 weeks. Once they're adults, they're going to eat primarily trash that people leave lying around on the side of the streets. But there is an early phase after weaning when they are not that good at finding food for themselves. Their mother has tired of them. Their fathers they never knew. So they have this period in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th months of life when they have a lot of difficulty surviving. And William Fielding suggested to me that he had the impression that the secret to a puppy's success was if the mother left the puppies near a human household that was not already caring for a dog. And this I thought was very interesting because it tied into something that I've known about for a long time. So one of the founders of ethology, Konrad Lorenz, had this idea that the young of all species are very attractive to us human beings. He called this, being a German speaker, he called this Kindchenschema, which is usually translated into English as like baby features. The idea being the young of all species have certain facial characteristics in common. The eyes of a baby are larger in the face than they are in an adult. The nose of a baby is smaller, and the mouth is also small and kind of, I don't know, cute. It's just cute. They're just cute. But it had also struck me for some time that newborn individuals of any species are not as attractive as babies or puppies or kittens that have had at least a few weeks of life. And I began to wonder whether perhaps it might be the case with dog puppies that they might be cutest to human beings just at that point in life around weaning, around 8 or 9 weeks, where their mother is getting rid of them and where human intervention could have the biggest impact in their survival. And this would be very interesting because it would suggest a level of coevolution between human and dog that was possibly contributing to the success of dogs living near human beings. So as it happens, I had an undergraduate student then, Nadine Chasini, who had friends who bred dog pups, who bred dogs of several different breeds. And she was able to get hold of sets of photographs from 3 breeds of dog that were quite diverse to look at in size, shape, and color. And she had photographs of these dogs, pups from these breeds, from birth to around 7 months of age. And for the younger ages, she had photographs every week. As the puppies got older, she only had photos every couple of weeks or so. But we had fairly dense sets of photographs, black and white photographs of puppies. And we showed them on a computer screen to students who just had to tell us by sliding a control how attractive, how cute they thought these dog pups were. So I was interested to see whether I was right to think that you can be too young to be cute, and to see whether indeed puppy cuteness peaks at around weaning time, where human intervention in their lives could make the biggest difference. And so Nadine did this with these 3 breeds of dog, the puppies. And here is a graph that shows you, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse cursor here, but along the bottom you have the age of the puppy in the photograph, and going upwards you have how attractive people found that puppy to be. So you can see the Jack Russell Terrier, sure enough, the youngest ones are not as cute as they will be at a point around, well, the mathematical function says that the maximum of the function is 7.7 weeks. And you can see they are very, very cute from about 7 to 12 weeks of age. That's the maximum cuteness of your Jack Russell Terrier. Your Cano Corso, the big South American dog, that had a mathematical function that peaked at 6.3 weeks. And again, you can see they are very, very cute from 6 to 12 weeks of age, again, around weaning time. And the White Shepherd, which is just a white morph of a German Shepherd, also peaking at just the same age. So this supports my theorizing that we and dogs may have co-evolved so that we are most interested in stepping into their lives just at that point where their mother is least interested in them, and just where our help can make the biggest difference in their lives. So it's one thing to look at these mathematical functions. If you're like me, they look beautiful. They look beautiful. It's really interesting to actually see the pictures of these puppies. So brace yourselves, because I am going to show you photographs of pups that are scientifically demonstrated to be the cutest possible headshots you will ever see. So there they are. Those are the Jack Russell, Cane Corso, and White Shepherds of the age nearest to the peak of the mathematical function, the age of peak cuteness, which varied from 6 to 8 weeks in the different breeds of dogs. And I'm sure you'll agree that that is a very, very attractive trio of puppies. Here they are at their least attractive younger age, which in every case is the earliest photograph we had, taken during the first week of life. And here are the least attractive older dogs, which in every case is the oldest photographs we had, 7 months of age. Now, I think they're still quite handsome at these older ages. And I also think that if you had formed a relationship with the individual animal at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 weeks, that relationship, of course, would continue as the dog gets older. But if you were forced to choose between the 6, 7, or 8 week old and the 7-month-old, then I think just in terms of cuteness, the 6, 7, 8 week old dog would win every time. So that's very, very interesting. And I think it's a clue towards how we and dogs have co-evolved and how the relationship that we have with dogs has co-evolved. Now I want to talk more about how dogs have this capacity to form strong emotional bonds. And here we need scientific techniques to analyze this thing that lay people call love. Love is, as the poet said, a many splendid thing. It has many facets. How do we pin it down into scientific terminology and scientific concepts? Let's look at this very, very simple task that Monique Udell and I learned from Mariano Bentasola, a friend from Argentina who came and visited for a few weeks. All we are looking at here is how much time does the animal spend inside a 1 meter circle next to this person. In both these videos, you see a wolf on the left, you see a dog on the right. They're both being treated the same. There's a 1 meter circle marked on the ground. And in both cases, this is a person that this animal has known basically all its life. On the left with the wolf, you have the keeper who hand-reared that wolf since it was a puppy. And on the right with the dog, you have the dog's owner, mistress, guardian, whatever terminology you prefer. And I hope you could see even in that brief video that even the hand-reared wolf, who definitely has some kind of a relationship with that person, doesn't show the same enthusiasm to be in the circle with the person as the dog does. We gave each animal 2 minutes and we measured what portion of 2 minutes the animal spent inside the circle with their person. And with the wolves, we find, yes, they know this person, they care about this person, they spend about 30 seconds, about a quarter of the 2 minute interval inside the circle with their person. With the dogs, we find on average, dogs spend almost the whole time inside that circle with their person. You get this really big difference in behavior, which is easy to replicate, and you find time and time again. And again, you could easily try this for yourselves. You need to separate yourself from your dog for a little while. 10, 15 minutes is probably enough. And then come into a room, sit down. Don't be demonstrative. You can touch the dog if it comes right up to you. You will most likely find that your dog will spend at least 2 minutes inside the circle interacting with you after even a pretty brief separation. Whereas your hand-reared wolf, on the other hand, doesn't have anything like the same level of enthusiasm, even though it is a relationship. And if you put an unknown person in the chair, the wolves spend no time at all interacting with an unfamiliar person, whereas your dog will still interact even with an unfamiliar person at a quite detectable level. So that's one of several simple behavioral tests that we use to measure the affection that dogs feel for people. Monique Udell was the lead author of all of these studies that I'm describing for you. She and I realized that if something is intrinsic to an animal, then ultimately it has to be expressed in their genetic material. The genome is the ultimate plan for everything that an animal is. Monique met a young geneticist, Bridget von Holt, at a conference, and they got to talking about this. And they decided to repeat this behavioral test and some other behavioral tests. Monique did the behavioral research, and she then sent DNA samples to Bridget von Holt at Princeton. DNA sample, just a mouth swab, doesn't hurt. And Bridget then did an analysis to identify genes in the genome that could make the difference between the behavior of the dogs, very friendly behavior of the dogs, and the behavior of the wolves. And it's hard to show interesting pictures of genetics. It's all just white machines that look like washing machines. But here's a graph showing how there are 3 genes that Bridget was able to identify that account for the difference in the affectionate behavior between dogs and wolves. And what's particularly interesting about this is that very, very occasionally, human beings also show mutations in these genes. And mutations in these 3 genes are part of a syndrome called Williams syndrome. Now, Williams syndrome involves 28 genes, and so it has a wide variety of impacts on a person. It leads to a strange facial structure, heart defects, a whole bunch of effects. But along the way, one of the most curious effects of this very rare syndrome, Williams-Buren syndrome, is what the medicos call exceptional gregariousness. People with Williams syndrome have this very extrovert, very, very friendly demeanor, and exactly what we see in our dogs. So we see how the ability to love people is programmed into the deepest level of dogs' biology, into their genetic material. We can also see dogs' affection for people in their hearts, quite literally in their hearts. This is a frame grab from a short movie. Scientists in Australia, this is Mia Cobb, strapping a heart rate monitor onto a dog's chest. These are the same heart rate monitors that athletes, human athletes, use to monitor their heart activity, their heart rhythm. There's no reason why you can't put one on a dog. You just have to get a strap that's a somewhat different length. So you put a heart rate monitor on the dog. This woman also has a heart rate monitor strapped onto her chest as well. And all that happens is that the person and the dog sit down next to each other while the scientists monitor their heart rhythms. And what they find is that when the person and the dog rest together, so as you see in this picture here, their heart rhythms actually synchronize. So it's just like in the movie, not the movie, in the song, it's just like in the song, 2 hearts beating as one. It's unbelievably cute. But there it is. It's a real thing. It's a real thing. So we see dogs' love for people in their genes. We see dogs' love for people in their heart rhythms. Fascinating research out of Azabu University in Japan, which unfortunately I only have this one photograph to try and illustrate with. There's a hormone called oxytocin, which people call the love hormone, because it's elevated when people are together with individuals that they are in a very strong relationship with. So it was first observed in mothers nursing their infants, elevated levels of oxytocin, also found in young, newly enamored couples, not old married couples, but newly enamored couples show this. And the group at Azabu University did a very simple study where they just had people look into their dog's eyes. And they asked the people on a checklist to identify the strength of the relationship they felt they had with their dog. And then they looked at how much the dog and the person looked into each other's eyes when they were just relaxing together. And they also measured oxytocin levels in the urine of both the person and the dog. So now they're able to put into relationship with each other the levels of oxytocin with the amount of gazing and the strength of the relationship of the person and their dog. And what this group found was that if the person and dog are in a strong relationship, a strong emotional relationship, and they look at each other, then their levels of oxytocin rise on both sides of the relationship. So this love hormone increases both in the person and in the dog when they're looking at each other intently. So we see dogs' love for people in their hormones. We also see, and this is research you may have already heard about, it's received quite a bit of publicity, it's been on television. This is research by Gregory Burns and his group at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. And what's amazing is that they have trained dogs to lie perfectly still in MRI scanners. If you've ever had an MRI scan, you know that the environment is quite strange. It's very noisy. The machine makes very loud clicking noises, and you have to lie perfectly still in this small sort of tunnel. It's all quite disconcerting. But together with an excellent dog trainer, Gregory Burns was able to train dogs, a group of dogs, to tolerate this strange environment, to lie perfectly still, so that they can then measure the activity in the dog's brain while the dog is wide awake and reacting to signals that they give the dog. So here you see a subject ready to step up into the scanner, getting closer into the scanner. Here's a dog lying perfectly still in the scanner. And here's a dog at the end, I think. This strap around the dog's head is because they put earmuffs on the dog's ears, and the strap is to hold the earmuffs on because the machine is so loud. So, okay. So it's an amazing achievement. What did they do with it? Well, the first experiment they did was a really very simple experiment. They show the dog a signal that means you are about to receive reward. That was one hand up. And when they've shown that signal, they give the dog a reward. Then they show the dog a signal, two hands together like this, that means you are not going to receive a reward. And they do not give the dog a reward after that signal. Why do they do this? They do this so that they can measure the dog's brain activity and identify the reward center in the dog's brain, the center in the brain that is activated by the expectation that something good is going to happen. And this isn't entirely surprising because studies even on our own species, after all, people have been put in these scanners for 20 years now, have identified a brain nucleus called the caudate nucleus as being primarily involved in processing reward. And so you see an image of one of these brain scans, one of these MRI scans, and you can see the hot spot here, the orange spot. That's the caudate nucleus. That's the center where you see the biggest effect of expecting reward. And you can see a graph here. This is time going along the bottom and the signal change going up. And you can see the red arrows indicate the time points where you get the biggest change in signal between expecting a reward and not expecting reward. Okay, so far, not too surprising. Caudate nucleus, long known to be the brain reward center. But Gregory Burns and his colleagues, have established that in the dog, you can find it, the dog will stay still enough that you get a good clean scan, that the whole thing works. Now it gets really interesting. Now we're going to ask, okay, we know where the brain reward center is. How does it respond if we show the dog a signal that you're going to get a piece of sausage, a hot dog reward, compared to showing the dog a signal that your reward is going to be that your beloved human is going to appear and say something nice. Okay? So I haven't got pictures of the dog in the scanner for this experiment. Just believe me, they put the dog in the scanner. They had trained the dog. One reward means food. One reward means human. And you can look at how the caudate nucleus lights up in response to those two rewards. Then they let the dogs out of the scanners and into this big room that you can see in this picture here. And you see there's a door at the back of the room. That door is going to open. and the dog is going to be confronted by a choice. This on our right, the dog's left, is that dog's beloved human. And over here, opposite, equal angle, equal distance, you might just about be able to see a yellow bowl of dog food. And so the door's going to open and this dog is going to be given a choice between beloved owner and dog food. And in this case, the dog chose beloved owner. In the next video, the same dog, the same owner, the same bowl of food. I forget now how many times they did this. I think it was 10 or 20 chances that each dog got. And in this particular trial, this same dog decided, look at how amused the owner is. Look at the look on her face. So the dogs get a real life choice between real life owner and real life bowl of food. And they get that choice several times. So we get an average score, I forget, I'd say 10 or 20 times. And the dog has been in the brain scanner where we can see how much the dog's brain caudate nucleus reward center lights up when the dog is expecting food or expecting the owner. The first thing is that for most dogs, the brain center lit up more intensely for the owner than for food. And similarly, most dogs more often chose their owner than they chose food. So that's number one. Number two is that you can put these two measures in relationship. So in this graph, going up and down, we have the dog's choice. The further up the graph, the more they chose their person. The lower down the graph, the more they chose the food. And we can put this in relationship to our measure of brain activity. The further to the right, the more the caudate nucleus activated for the person. The more to the left, the more the caudate nucleus activated for the food. And what we find is each point here is an individual dog. So again, I'm hoping you can see my mouse pointer. I'm pointing at a dog that's towards the top and towards the right. So this is a dog whose brain reward center was more active for the person and who chose the person more frequently, as was this dog, this dog, this dog. And down the bottom here, we have some poor sad dog who it really seems did not love his person because given a choice, he was much more likely to choose food. And when measuring brain activation, his brain was much more activated for food than for person. But what's so fascinating is that you can see this clear relationship between the behavioral response, the choice of person or choice of food, and the brain activity activated for person compared to activated for food. And you can see that there's a very tight, strong relationship. So this study shows us how dogs' love for people shines through in their brain activity, in their genes, in their heart rates, in their hormones, in their brain activity. We see at all these different levels how dogs' whole beings are programmed for loving people. Well, I usually keep things simple and just say dogs are built to love people. But actually, and I think it's an important point to draw attention to, dogs are not programmed to love people. Dogs are programmed to love anything. They are programmed to love whatever beings they meet during the first few months of life. In all animal species, the first few months of the first early period of life is a crucial phase where we learn, we, dogs, wolves, ducks, learn what kinds of beings is it okay to form relationships with. Because no living animal is born knowing what species it belongs to. That is left open. Now, in all wild animal species, the period of time where an animal learns what kinds of beings it's okay to form relationships with, that period of time is very short, just a few weeks of life, where the chances of an individual of one species having any kind of opportunity to interact with individuals of other species is very, very slight. Your wolf pups are in the den with their mother. They just meet their mother and father. But where dogs are exceptional, and this has actually been known for a long time, is that dogs have a much longer window of opportunity, and therefore they can quite readily learn to form relationships with members of different species. To us, it looks like dogs have a special willingness to form relationships with people, because all of the dogs that we know grew up around people, and so they have this willingness to form relationships with people. But sometimes people intentionally place dogs with other species. Now, this dog here, whose name I've forgotten, is from a Turkish breed, the Anatolian, a breed of dog that has a long history as a livestock guard. And this is from a goat ranch in the northeast of Arizona that I visited for myself just because I wanted to see what this was like. And here you can see that this dog has a strong, affectionate bond with goats. That was achieved simply by placing the dog, the puppy, with goats when it was young. And obviously the goats, when they were young, they also grew up around dogs, and so they reciprocate this relationship. Livestock guarding dogs, livestock guarding is one of the most ancient functions for dogs. It's much, much older than herding, much, much older than almost anything else. Seems to be one of the oldest functions that dogs have fulfilled for human beings. Goes back many thousands of years. But it's become relatively rare, and so people have sort of forgotten it. It's cute enough, but the very cutest example I've heard of, have not yet seen for myself, is livestock guarding dogs who protect penguins on an island off the south coast of Australia, where the penguins have been decimated by foxes getting across at low tide. And these dogs are now very successful at protecting the penguins from foxes. Super, super cute example that I really hope to see for myself one of these days. Okay, so I thought it was important, although most of probably the reason why dogs have this capacity is probably tied up with their relationship historically and prehistorically with human beings, it's nonetheless important to recognize dogs can form relationships with members of other species if they meet individuals from that other species early enough in life. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up. I've told you how I convinced myself, and I think a few other people, that dogs do not actually have a special form of cognition. Dogs do not have special skills in understanding people. Rather, the secret of dogs' success, their uniqueness, is this amazing drive, desire, capacity that they have to form strong emotional bonds with members of other species, which is especially important in their relationship with us, which is the secret of their success. Now, I've shown you how we see this in simple behavioral studies. You see it every day in your daily life when you come home, right? You come home, you come in the door. If you live with other human beings, as I do, then you can call out to the other human beings in your household. And if you're lucky, your other human people, your people, if you're lucky, will call out from wherever they are in the house some kind of grunt of acknowledgement that you have returned home. Your dog will hurtle in from wherever he or she was resting when he hears you come in the door. And, you know, depending on your dog's personality and all the rest of it. I mean, I used to have a dog when I was a kid. I would throw myself onto the sofa and he would come charging in from wherever he was. And I don't know, 10 feet away, he would throw himself up into the air. So he would land literally on my head and on my shoulders and just try and kiss me and my brother. And it was the sweetest thing. And the dog I have now, she goes crazy with excitement and cries when I come in the door. I mean, you don't need a brain scanner or genetic equipment for genetic analysis to be able to see the intensity of your dog's love for you. Okay, one last experiment to share with you, most recent experiment that we've done. This is a newer student, Joshua Van Borg, presently doing his PhD with me here at Arizona State University. And we were interested in the question, well, okay, so dogs care about people, but how far does their caring go? What would a dog do if you were in distress? And you might know, you know, there's the old TV show Lassie, and, you know, the famous thing where Lassie comes barking and the boy says, "What's that, lassie? Timmy's fallen down the well." Well, obviously we know that's fiction, right? Dogs don't really come and explain with their barks what's going on in the world. We wanted to create a situation where we would see whether a dog was distressed that a human was in distress, and given that we made the situation as easy as we could, would the dog actively help? So here in this video, you see a person who's stuck in a box. I say stuck, they could actually get out. And she's calling out for help to her dog. And we're measuring what the dog does. We can see that this dog is distressed. I don't know how well you can hear the audio, but the dog cries and whines. And the dog's not super quick at figuring out what needs to be done. But ultimately, hooray, the dog opens the box and frees their human. And then we have a couple of control conditions. We'll just show you one of them. In the control condition you're about to see, this person is going to read calmly from a magazine article, and we measure what does the dog do. And I think we had a total of 60 dogs did this experiment. We mixed up the order of the conditions. We found that in almost every case, the dogs were very distressed when their owner was in the box in distress, but were calm when the owner was calm, reading calmly in the box. And we found that if the dog understands how to open the box, which only about 1 in 3 of the dogs showed us that they could understand how the box opened. If they understand how to open the box, then they do open the box to rescue their owner. So this shows that a dog, first of all, understands when a person is in distress. And secondly, if it's within their capacity, and I think we always need to keep in mind that dogs' cognitive capacity is not as great as it is sometimes thought to be. But if they understand what to do, then they will, and they do, open the box and rescue their owner. So dogs really love people, and they will help their people if they can just understand what needs to be done. Okay, so that's my story. I hope it was a decent glass of lemonade for you. And I'm very happy to answer the questions that this raises. I'm sure you have many questions. So thank you for your time. And yeah, ask me what you'd like to ask me.
Thank you, Clive. That was brilliant.
Good. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
I did very much. If it's okay with you, I just would like to play the sponsor video one more time, just for our sponsors, just in case people didn't hear it. In the meantime, if everyone in the chat would like to start flying your questions over to Clive, that would be wonderful. There's a link coming up on the screen that allows people that will watch the recording to go and find that video as well. So we'll just try our Pets at Home sponsor again, just in case it works this time. Oh, okay. It doesn't seem to want to play. So there is a link in the chat for everyone. If you can go and check out the sponsor videos, that would be greatly appreciated. And I'll turn the slides off, and we can see Clive better.
My wife says I have a face for radio.
We have got so many questions here, Clive. This is fantastic.
Yeah, I can see.
Did you see any in the chat that you that you wanted to answer in particular, or should I go through them all?
Well, they're all good. You want to just yeah, I don't know how long we have. I mean, I'm happy to answer everything, but
I mean, in theory, we have 5 minutes, but I have nothing else to do, so it is completely up to you as to how many you have. There's
for whatever
most of
reason,
the questions. Most of the questions seem to be around the layouts for the study design itself and how much the control influence. But there was a really good question from, I think it was Anne McBride, that asked if you'd had a look into the attachment of the animal itself. So the human's attachment style. So if they're both securely attached, it may be simply that they see them both in the room. You're okay, I'm okay, so they'll go and get the food. Did you look into any attachment styles at all for these studies?
No. I mean,
Okay.
measuring attachment is actually a lot of work. We did attachment studies once on wolf pups, and it's quite time consuming. You can just ask people. There is a questionnaire approach. That's what the Japanese did with the oxytocin studies, for example, where they did find that to get a really good oxytocin response, you need to have a person and a dog who are in a strong relationship. I'm always a bit skeptical about questionnaire type instruments and would prefer to do proper full-on empirical studies. And the Ainsworth strange situation test is the standard test for attachment, and it's too time consuming. One of the things when we do studies with people and their pets is that we know that realistically there's a limit to how much of people's time you can ask for. And so with the rescue experiment, which already gets to be quite time consuming because there are the 3 different conditions, we did not do an attachment type test in addition. I mean, certainly it would be a wonderful question to have evidence on at this stage. And I think this was a question somebody asked in the questions there. At this stage, we're interested in understanding why only a minority of the dogs opened the box. And I said already as I was talking about it that one major thing is only a minority of dogs actually understand how to get the box open. So we are now doing a follow-up condition where the dogs are pre-trained to open the box, and we find that if they know how to open it, if we know that they know how to open it, then a much higher proportion, the majority of dogs, will open the box. And then the other question is, why exactly are they opening the box? Are they opening the box because of their concern about the person's distress, or are they opening the box because they are distressed themselves and they want to mitigate their own distress by getting together with their person? And so you can get at that question by creating a new type of box where when the person is freed, they are not freed into the same space as their dog. So they and their dog are not reunited. And so that would be something I'd really like to investigate.
Lovely. There's a couple of questions about oxytocin and the heart rate studies that you mentioned, about how much has been in other species. Have there been any other comparative studies or anything done alongside other companion species?
Not that I know of. I'm not aware of anything else. I mean, there may be something out there. I am a bit dog focused, I will admit to that. So it's possible. I mean, in principle, why not, right? I mean, the thing is, if it's less common for other species to form those kind of emotional bonds with people, but it does happen. It's not impossible. It's just so much easier with dogs. And my prediction would be that if a member of another species is in a strong emotional relationship with a human being, then I would expect the same mechanisms to be engaged. I don't think dogs have different mechanisms. There are just changes in the thresholds in dogs that make it much easier for those mechanisms to become engaged. And certainly the oxytocin research is going on. And I should acknowledge that there are now multiple research groups around the world looking at the oxytocin effect, and they don't all seem to be getting the same results. The Japanese group at Azabu University were the first, and I visited with them, and what they do is certainly sincere. It's certainly good science, but these hormones can be tough to measure, and and other groups are not necessarily finding the exact same results on the oxytocin.
Okay, thank you. There's a question here from Valerie asking, a popular theory right now has to do with domestication as a driver for cooperative behavior, like Hare's recent work. How should we think of domestication in relation to your ideas about love?
So I think that domestication, the crucial changes in domestication have been developmental changes and other changes in thresholds that make dogs much more prepared, ready, willing to form strong emotional connections. Those strong emotional connections then, of course, make cooperative behavior that much easier. But where I depart from Brian Hare's thinking on this, as I said at the beginning of the talk, is that I do not believe that dogs have any special forms of cognition, any special forms of intelligence, any special ways to reason about what people are doing. And the truth is, I mean, we sort of all know this, right? I mean, it's kind of funny when you watch the dog in that video being so slow to get that box open to let the person out. I mean, there is this enormous difference between what dogs on average, of course, there are smart dogs out there, but what a typical randomly chosen dog can figure out on its own in terms of getting things open and operating things, and what we can train a dog to do. I mean, they're so biddable, right? Biddable is this term that gets used commonly with dogs and hardly ever in any other context, right? Biddable. They're so easily brought to do things. They don't easily figure things out on their own, but they're easily brought to do things by people who understand just a little bit, really, about how to train animals.
There's a lovely question here from Tabitha who's asked, how can we use what yourself, Clive, knows that dogs love to improve the lifestyle and performance of working dogs?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. I'm not a dog trainer, and I wouldn't claim to know how to train a dog. This isn't quite the answer to the question. So I am not sure. I mean, yeah. So insofar as you're working with working dogs, what I would say is keep in mind the importance to the dog of the relationship that you and he or she have. My message to people, my mission, if you like, is not particularly about working dogs. It's probably more about pet dogs, about lazy pet dogs, than about busy working dogs, although it has some applicability to working dogs. And that is that we mustn't forget the emotional relationship needs of our dogs. We bring them into our lives, not so much for working dogs, but for pet dogs, which is the majority of dogs in first world nations. For pet dogs, we bring them into our lives because it's tremendously enriching to have this very emotionally available individual, this very loving individual in our lives. That's what we want them for. And then too often, people just leave their dogs alone. We treat them like we treat the other smart gadgets in our lives. I mean, we don't worry about the television getting lonely when we switch it off and go out to work, right? And too often, I think people treat their dogs as if they're another device that you can just unplug and walk away from. And that's simply not the case. We bring them into our lives because of their loving natures, because of their emotional availability, because of the rich relationship that they seek with us. And it is so rewarding for us and therapeutic often. But then we don't reciprocate. We say, well, this was great. This was great. Thank you very much. I enjoyed having your company at breakfast. And now I'm off and I'm going to be out for 8, 10, 12 hours. And that's just too much. We cannot expect our dogs to be able to respond to that sort of situation. So my mission is to get people to recognize dogs' reciprocal emotional needs and not leave them alone for such a long time. Now that's, as I say, not particularly about working dogs, who actually, I guess, are less likely to be left alone since they're working with their people, but it has some relevance there too. Absolutely.
And that kind of research can go towards improving the welfare of all dogs, not just working dogs, as you said.
Yeah.
Tamara Temple has mentioned that Neglected children early in life also struggle to figure things out, and she wonders if early enrichment in problem solving is a factor in whether or not an adult dog can figure things out in studies like this.
Early experience of problem solving, well, presumably, I cannot, off the top of my head, I cannot think of any studies that have looked at that. But from my perspective, I don't know that we're really looking for problem solving in our dogs most of the time. Again, I mean, working dogs are a tiny, tiny fraction of the total dog population. Most dogs in first world nations are companions. They're friends, they're buddies, we don't need them to solve problems. And in fact, oftentimes, I mean, people think they want to get a smart dog and they get themselves a smart dog. And it just turns out to be a nuisance because smart dogs are forever getting themselves into trouble. I mean, my dog's not smart, and that's fine by me. I don't want her figuring out how to open cupboards and get into the rubbish and anything else. I want her to be emotionally available. The interesting thing to my mind is we know that early lifetime trauma has abiding impacts on people's ability to form useful, strong emotional bonds as they go through life. And this is relatively rare in our own species, fortunately. But there have been cases, the most famous cases, the most studied cases of these terrible orphanages that were found in Romania when Romania opened up to the outside world 30 years ago now. But in dogs, we could study this more directly. I mean, people do routinely raise dogs under a range of different conditions, not all of which are likely to be the ideal circumstances for them to be able to form good emotional bonds as they grow up. And it would be interesting to look at that in more detail. I'm sure we're all aware of anecdotes of puppies who came from puppy mills and don't seem to be good at forming relationships as they go through life. But I'm not aware of any scientific studies that have looked at this systematically, and it deserves and ought to be looked at.
Mm-hmm. Kara's asked, do you find differences in attachment to humans in working breeds compared to other breeds? Do you find any breed differences in your studies?
So people always ask about breeds because the breed clubs encourage the belief that breeds differ fundamentally in temperament or personality. There's actually not a lot of evidence for that. There are only two major studies that have studied enough dogs on temperament, personality in different breeds. One of the studies found that the differences within breeds were actually bigger than the differences between the breeds. And the other one, the second one, with a completely different method, found that the differences within breeds were almost as big as the differences between breeds. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that our studies, like that experiment where the dogs are rescuing their person from a box, we use 60 dogs. 60 dogs is quite a lot of work. I mean, ask my student Joshua Van Borg about it. It's many months of work when you think about the number of people who say they'll come along and they don't show up and so on. So we're not going to do studies ourselves unless we get major outside funding. We're not going to do studies with more than 60 dogs in one experiment. Well, there are 200 plus recognized breeds of dog. So to do a study on breeds, looking at breed differences, you really need to have a few thousand dogs, as I say, because we already know from other people's studies of tens of thousands of dogs, we already know that the differences within breeds are enormous. So it takes a vastly different scale of science to actually look at potential differences between breeds of dog. Would it be worth doing? Absolutely, it would be worth doing. There would surely be some differences. I mean, everybody knows that like livestock guarding breeds clearly have a quite different kind of temperament from herding breeds, which is interesting because there they are. They're two different groups of farm dogs, right? They're livestock. They're two different groups of breeds of dogs that hang out with livestock on farms. You'd think they might be sort of similar, but in fact, it's immediately apparent that their temperaments are quite different. So I would love to be doing that kind of research. And people are always asking me about breeds, but it's a vastly different scale of science than what I usually get involved in. It would require, we'd require a real staff and real money to be doing that. And unfortunately, for all the many people ask these questions, there don't seem to be the organizations that would really want to spend that kind of money on those kinds of issues.
Absolutely. Simon's asked a question that I just have to clarify. asking, why do people think the unicorn breeds are so important? But I'm not too sure what it means by unicorn breeds.
What does unicorn breed mean?
I'm not sure. I'm hoping he'll
It's exceptional breeds like border collies. Is that? Oh, it's going dark. Why is it going dark?
I don't know. And Tabitha's also mentioned that it's important for us to consider how much time and love we dedicate to our working dogs when they're not at work.
Yeah. I mean, they certainly they're still looking for the relationships, and it's so interesting to me to see, military working dogs. The military, tough, not getting soppy and emotional, and yet, the way the bond that forms between men and women in combat situations and their sniffer dogs or whatever working dogs they have, which are also tough animals, right? The toughest dogs. And yet you still see abundant evidence, touching, deeply moving evidence. Okay. So Simon, Clara, sorry, the working breeds. Why?
Why do people think their working breeds are so important?
Why? Well, I mean, I'm not one of those people. I mean, the thing is, but hold on. I mean, I don't mean to dismiss it. I mean, historically, we're living in a new zone, a new phase, right? I'm not allowed to tell you about my next book, or my agent would shoot me. But but think about the history of people and dogs going back 15,000 years, and the phase we're in now, where almost, in the first world, almost all the dogs we have are pets. And, like my beautiful, wonderful Zephos, who doesn't do anything useful at all, right? I mean, she's just a loving companion, and that's a wonderful thing. This is a relatively new phase of the human dog history. The human dog history until, let's say, 200 years ago, or, like even there are these pictures from the First World War. I mean, they're sad, but they're interesting, of dogs pulling a sort of a cart with a machine gun on it. I mean, until 100, 150 years ago, most dogs had a job, right? I mean, there were jobs for dogs. Working dogs were what dogs were. That's why they existed. And if they weren't doing a job, they had to have a damn good excuse why they weren't doing a job. Just like children, for that matter. Once your kid could walk, they had to be taking care of some sheep or some cows or something, doing something useful. And the same was true for our dogs. So I think, the fact that the way we think about dogs, we still think a lot about dogs who have jobs and who work and do useful things. I understand where that comes from, and we should recognize that this phase of dog human history that we are in right now is a brand new phase. There have been pets going back thousands of years. The Romans had pets. Hunter-gatherers occasionally would keep an animal as a pet, although they would get bored with it and eat it. But this idea that the standard role for a dog is doing nothing practical, just hanging around, being good company, that is a new role. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, Simon's just mentioned that he agrees, and he's not disregarding the history. He just thinks that some people might be more ignoring some of the history things there when it comes to certain breeds. Yeah. But we do have another couple of questions.
Okay.
In the study looking at proximity to the handler by dogs and wolves, he believes that's Bentosila. Was the situation in which this was tested similar? Was the environment, room, pen, in both cases familiar or unfamiliar?
Yeah, well, so the thing is, we like to say that it was similar, but there are undeniable points of difference. So for one thing, the wolves out at Wolf Park, they live outdoors. They interact with people most days, but they don't sleep in the same room as people. They don't. So the degree of similarity that's available is somewhat constrained. We did the best we could under the circumstances. We have, and now I'm confusing different studies because we've done this a few different times. I'm pretty certain the dogs were in an unfamiliar room. And I now forget whether the wolves were in, I think the wolves were moved to an unfamiliar pen. But okay. I will say, I'm proud of the research that we've done. And I noticed somebody asked me what Monique's last name was. It's Udell, Udell, and she is now an associate professor at Oregon State University and doing her own work. I'm tremendously proud of what she achieves, and she's quite independent of me now. But the work we did is obviously I'm proud of it, but even better, what's grown up since we started doing that work is out in Austria, the Wolf Science Center in Austria. There, what's wonderful is they have wolves like the wolves that we worked with at Wolf Park, raised very similarly, strongly influenced by Wolf Park. But what's so interesting is they also have dogs living outdoors in enclosures like the wolves do. And so they actually, when they do some wonderful research comparing dogs and wolves, those dogs and wolves really have been raised under absolutely identical conditions. And it is fascinating to go and visit and just to walk up to the wolf enclosures. And the wolves are like, oh, so it's another human. That's kind of interesting. And to walk up to the dog enclosures, dogs, they're raised outdoors just like the wolves. And the dogs are like, oh my God, everybody, humans are coming. I mean, it's so interesting to see the difference in responsiveness between the wolves and the dogs that really are truly raised under very, very closely conditions out there.
That's absolutely fascinating. And it ties in with a question from Christine, who's asked, if the bond with humans is formed in a narrow window in the early years, how does the bond form when a dog without much early human contact is adopted as an adult?
Okay, so even dogs have to meet with humans in their early months of life if they are to have the capacity to form strong emotional bonds with humans as they go through life. I am very interested in this question, and yet I have never met a dog that did not meet people early in life. Even street dogs, most of the dogs in the world do not live as pets inside people's homes. You think of the hundreds of millions of dogs in India and elsewhere in Southeast Asia or in Africa or in South America. All of these street dogs, they are interacting with people. Just because they're not pets doesn't mean they don't meet people when they're small. And as I said, they're especially cute when they're small, especially attractive to people. And so people do talk to puppies in the street. They do interact with them. The big experiment that was carried out in the 1950s and 60s by Scott and Fuller, the big, famous, infamous studies of Scott and Fuller in the United States in that period, they intentionally, experimentally reared dog pups without any exposure to human beings whatsoever for the first 3 months of life. And then they tested how those dogs reacted towards humans as young adults. And they reported that those dogs reacted like little wild animals. And they said there was nothing you could do to bring them to be able to relax around people. And so, I mean, I'm fascinated by that and would love to study it more, but I couldn't in good conscience carry out an experiment like that myself. I mean, I would not. I don't think the university would allow me to. I hope they wouldn't allow me to. Raise dog pups under conditions where they did not meet humans for the first few months of life and therefore were unable to form relationships with people as adults, because a dog that is incapable of forming relationships with human beings, there's no space for that dog in modern Western society. Back in the 1960s, they just euthanized those dogs. They didn't have, well, I say in the book that they didn't have the same qualms that we have nowadays. And one of the most interesting things that's happened to me is that the experimenters are long since deceased, but John Paul Scott's daughter found me and wrote me a letter, and she told me that I was correct to assume that they euthanized those dogs, but that it was wrong of me to assume that her father and his colleagues were happy about this. She said that her father deeply, deeply regretted having carried out an experiment that forced them into a situation where there was nothing they could do but euthanize the dogs. And that I was wrong to assume that this was something that they were comfortable about. So yeah, what was the question?
I think you've covered it above and beyond. I think we've got time for just one more question. And we'll end on one going back to oxytocin, I think, to give us all a nice little boost.
That's what we need.
So Valerie has asked, because oxytocin is also related to in-group love and out-group derogation, can we think of dogs' love as being specific to their in-group? It's like their owner or their family.
Well, so as I think I mentioned, the story with oxytocin is still an evolving story. But the question stands quite independent of the oxytocin story. Mm-hmm. And I think that there are many ways that dogs' love and dogs' social sense is wonderfully compatible with us human beings. And one of those things is that dogs, I mean, it's dogs' sense of who's us and who's not us is so wonderfully spontaneously compatible with our human sense of that. So my own dog, who I've mentioned a couple of times, and I'm famous or infamous for having in print in a national paper in the United States, I said my dog was a lovable idiot, and I was quoted in the paper as saying this. And so, you know, I'm never praising my dog's intelligence, and yet her social intelligence is completely compatible with my sense of what's okay, to the point that when we once had a painter painting the outside of the house, and you know how it is, the boss guy comes around and you discuss the job and he gives you a quote and you agree the job. And I said to him, look, you know, but he doesn't come and paint the house himself. He has people who do the painting for him. And I said to him, look, it's the outside of the house. We'll leave the back gate unlocked. Just tell your guys, just come around and get painting. They don't need to come around and ring the doorbell and say hello. I don't care about that. I don't care, but my dog cares. And so some unknown person lets himself into our backyard, and my dog, who's actually very gentle, would never hurt anybody, she goes completely crazy and barks up this storm, and the poor painter has to beat a retreat. He comes back round to the front door, rings the doorbell, of which the dog barks, but all we need to do is shake hands. So my dog just needs to see me speak gently and kindly to this person. Obviously, she doesn't know what we're saying, but she understands my tone of voice, and she sees us shake hands, and now he's part of our social group. And as I say, this is not the world's smartest dog, but her sense of how social groups work and who's in the group and who's not in the group is 100% compatible with my sense, my human sense of how a group works. And that, you know, that is a major part of the secret of her success. We can call it intelligence if you want. I mean, you know, anything that would qualify as an intelligence test, she's not smart. But when it comes to social relationships, to affectionate relationships, and in-group, out-group relationships, her understanding matches my understanding completely. And that's part of the secret of her success.
That's fun. I think that's a wonderful story to end on as well, Clive.
Good.
So thank you so much for coming along and for opening up the ISAZ conference for us. This is absolutely wonderful. Thank you to everyone that has watched and joined in and asked questions. It's been fantastic. I hope to see most of you tomorrow for our satellite day on assistance dogs, where we have some fantastic speakers. It is recorded, so you will be able to see the recordings. And we've got loads of thank yous coming in now.
Well, thank you, everybody. I mean, it's, as I said, you know, these are such strange times, and yet I think some of these things, like being able to do this, everybody all around the world, and we're all just together for an hour. I mean, this is worth a lot, and I don't think we'll give this up when the pandemic is over. This is fun. This is good. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much for joining us, Clive, and enjoy the rest of your day, evening, morning, wherever you are in the world. Good evening, everyone. Thank you and goodbye.
Bye-bye.